Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's online event featuring 4 knowledgeable subject matter experts and an excellent moderator who will speak about the challenges and priorities for anti-violence work with women with precarious immigration status. Before we begin today's event, we'd like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHIO, which is located in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them in this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land as well. My name is Andrew Tolmeyer. I go by the pronouns he, him, and I'm the Education Coordinator with N4. I will be hosting today's panel discussion. My co-host is María Maddock, who will be monitoring the Q&A box today. As well, we also have our conference coordinator, Colleen Drake, here on the call today to prepare for our upcoming N4 conference that will be on March 1st to 3rd, 2022. So keep an eye out for that with regards to registration details coming soon. I'm pleased to introduce you to our panel moderator today, Leah Woolner. Leah has 10 years of experience working in research, advocacy, and direct service provision with racialized and migrant women facing various forms of structural and interpersonal violence. She is currently the bilingual coordinator of the National Women's Network at the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, an initiative seeking to build collective community power among racialized, refugee, and migrant women's organizations in Canada. Leah has worked on various qualitative research projects exploring sexual orientation and gender identity refugee claims, wartime sexual violence, children born of rape, and refugee service provision. She has also overseen a psychosocial support program for precarious status migrant women survivors of exploitation, coercion, and violence, and is a former executive committee member of Panay Quebec, a grassroots organization for migrant Filipino caregivers in Montreal. She holds a Master's of Social Work from McGill and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Concordia. Welcome, Leah. I'm also pleased to introduce you to today's panelists. Panelists, I'm going to ask that you turn on your video as I introduce you. Diana Gallego is a Colombian-trained lawyer with experience in advocacy, human rights, and social justice. In 2002, Diana was forced to flee Colombia with her husband and son. This experience shaped a new commitment and led her into working with immigrants and refugees. Diana graduated in community work from George Brown College in Toronto. She is currently teaching future community workers at George Brown as well on a part-time basis. María Ramírez Bolaños is originally from El Salvador and currently pursuing a degree in gender and women's studies at York University. A graduate of the Social Science Worker Immigrants and Refugee Program at Seneca, María has been steadfast community organizer and advocate working to increase access to justice for marginalized communities. Over the years, María has worked and volunteered in different settlement organizations throughout the city of Toronto. María is currently the Women's Program Support Worker at the FCJ Refugee Center, where she provides direct and immediate settlement services to newly arrived refugees and migrant women. Outside her role at the FCJ Center, María works with unaccompanied and separated refugee children in an emerging initiative, the Center for Refugee Children. Juvaria Yasser is a community worker and center manager at the South Asian Women's Community Center in Montreal. She has been working at the center since 2006. As a community worker, she has gained the skills and experience to work with marginalized communities, immigrants, and particularly women. Rosa-Elena Arteaga has over 27 years of frontline experience working with the anti-violence field supporting girls, women, and femmes from diverse backgrounds and who have experienced gender-based violence. Rosa-Elena is currently the Director of Clinical Practice and Direct Services with Battered Women's Support Services. Throughout her profession, Rosa-Elena has worked on projects that have influenced policies to support girls, women, and femme survivors of gender-based violence. Through an intersectional feminist, anti-oppression, and decolonizing approach, Rosa-Elena has created and implemented programs and has facilitated numerous workshops on violence prevention and intervention locally, nationally, and internationally. Thank you all for joining us today. Today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our N4 platform. We'll share this with you as soon as it becomes available. Should there be any technical issues during this webinar, we will inform you with details for an alternate makeup session. Before we begin today's event, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our platform features to help enhance your participation experience. Throughout today's session, we invite you to write your questions in the Q&A window. If you have a question for a specific panelist, please include their name at the start of the question. And we know that sometimes many of you might have the same question or be interested in a particular response. Today, you have the option to upvote a question. Please upvote questions you're interested in hearing the answer to, and we'll prioritize which questions we pose to the speaker first. Our panelists today have no conflicts of interest to declare. And with that said, let's jump right into today's panel discussion, which I will now pass over to Leah. Thank you. Take it away, Leah.
Thanks so much for your introduction, and welcome to all of you. I'm really pleased to be joining as the moderator of this panel from the traditional and unceded territory of the Gallego peoples on the island known as Juvaria or Montreal. So on this day, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, it's really imperative that we start this conversation by making the links in between the violence facing Indigenous women and gender diverse people, and that which faces precarious status migrant women. We know that the ongoing legacy of colonialism and settler colonialism continues to greatly shape the various different forms of both interpersonal and structural violence facing Indigenous communities of women and gender diverse people in this country. So I think, as we will find today in this panel, there's lots of connections in between looking at the Indigenous movement for sovereignty and missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, and some of the topics that we will be discussing today. And this is particularly true for many migrants in Canada who themselves come from Indigenous communities in the global South that have been impacted by colonial violence. So with all of this in mind, I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. And let's begin with the first question, which is if you could just please situate yourself and your work, your anti-violence work with precarious status migrant women. Perhaps what is your role in your organization, and what does that look like in the region where you are working and living? So let's begin with Rosa.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I am an immigrant and a settler in this unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I want to acknowledge that I am uninvited guest, but also I want to acknowledge that the reasons why I had to come to this country are similar to many reasons why women who come to Canada, whether they are able to come with a status, some form of immigration status, or under a precarious immigration status. I think that we need to recognize that, right? Because I think that in the large society sometimes is this idea that these immigrants, these migrant people, these refugees, and that we just come, right? And the reality is that the majority of people don't want to leave their families, their communities, their country, but we are forced to migrate. And the reality is that in the case of women, in some countries, just by the fact that they are women, they experience gender persecution, and then other people is gender identity. And other forms of kind of cultural oppression, right? We also need to mention some cultural practices that oppress women, like child brides, So it is important to recognize that if we are talking about self-identified women who come with their partner because he is persecuted, but then once that they arrive into Canada, then they are facing violence from their partner, who also he was oppressed by a system in their country. And what we know is that the last thing that the women want to do is to expose the person that they love, and because they already have suffered and gone through a lot. So at Battered Women Support Services, we are committed. For the last 20 years, we have been doing a lot of work with women who are in Canada under non-status, that we call it precarious immigration status, because there is an intersection of many things why people end with precarious immigration status. And at the time that we decided to really address the status matters in the contributing factors of gender violence, and also how service providers I don't know, 20 years ago, they were not really offering those supports. And what we saw, we are not seen as an immigrant serving organization. We are a feminist organization that supports all women who are dealing with gender-based violence. But at the time, 20 years ago, many immigrant serving organizations were not supporting women with precarious immigration status just because the status, right? So we decided that we needed to provide services and to exactly specialize in recognizing how there is an intersection of the Canadian legal system that is not only immigration, but also can be criminal system, can be family law. You know, when we think about a sponsorship breakdown, or when we think about women who are on a student visa. So all these factors. So we created services. So we have legal services that provide sometimes pro bono lawyers, legal information, how to navigate the system. And also at that time, like let's say around 18 years ago, what I found out is that there was not a lot of knowledge among lawyers around the gender persecution piece, right? That sometimes some of the applications fail because women didn't know that they have a case, right? So through really supporting immigrant women, women with non-status, or what we call precarious immigration status, through really expose what they went through. Because sometimes, again, within society, we believe that it's just one issue, or she's been persecuted, or she has a case, or doesn't have a case, or why she's here. But if we think about the spectrum of gender violence, sometimes, again, since the moment that she has born, she has been oppressed. And that oppression can also be an intersection with social class, you know, ethnicity, all these backgrounds. So in our work, we understand that. And we understand that her story can be very deep, very complex, and that her story is something to take in consideration towards providing services for her to build trust, to start working towards healing, but also in the case of status matters, and how that is a privilege for some of us, and for others becomes a factor that put her in situations where she cannot leave abusive partners, you know, and what we know about fear of being deported. Something that we did in Vancouver is to work with BPD, with the Vancouver Police Department, to have an agreement that if the woman doesn't have criminal record and she's dealing with domestic violence or sexualized violence, that she can trust to provide her statement without having the fear that she may be at risk of deportation, right? And we have done a lot of work around that. Also with many groups in Vancouver, we work towards sanctuary health, because there was a time that, again, many women with precarious status couldn't access services, right?
Mm-hmm.
For just basic services, just emotional support, and then health services. So now we have more access to other services. And I think at that time, again, like around 20 years ago, we decided to create a manual and to really name all these things, right? Like the intersection of violence, how we are stratified by class, race, skills, right? Like, like sometimes also there is discrimination for not having the skills that are required in Canada. But then what women share with us is that even for some of them who have the skills to look for a job, also they get discriminated because of where they come from. So we created that manual, and then we provided a lot of information to service providers, lawyers, social workers. And I believe that we made a change. And since then we have been affecting change, right? And affecting systemic change. And going back to the question about the organization has like around 20 different programs. And some of the programs are offered in different languages. We train a number of women in the community who want to give back and who represent the people who access our services, right? The different languages. So we have around 25 languages, and a lot of the services we offer, again, take in consideration the intersection of having to deal with an immigration status that may be a barrier for the person to access safety, to become free of violence, and also to access justice.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. It's really incredible to see all of the different ways that you've been working over the last 20 years. I'm wondering if Juvaria, you would like to answer this first question.
Thank you so much, Leah. I'm very grateful to T4 for inviting me here today to share what we do here at SOC, the South Asian Women's Community Center. And I'm very excited to be amongst this wonderful group of people who do so much good work, and to know about what you're all doing and share what we are doing here at SOC. So the South Asian Women's Community Center, we call ourselves SOC, just to make it easy for everyone, is celebrating its 40th year this year of existence. When the center was started, the purpose was to give frontline services and support to people from the South Asian countries who had come and settled here in Montreal, and to advocate for the rights of the marginalized communities here. Over the years, we have evolved. Our services are available for everyone. We are a women's center that gives services to men also. And the reason to make this decision was simple, because most of our women, when they come from the South Asian countries, they come from a very patriarchal society. They depend on men to do things, to move about, and we wanted to make sure that any woman who wants to access our services is able to come to us. So we opened the center for men, but our focus is always and has always been working for and with women. Anti-violence work is one of the most important work that we do here, and our anti-violence work is kind of twofold. It has a twofold approach. So what we do is that we work with individual cases, victims and survivors of violence. And then on the second side, we have lots of awareness programs, projects, and campaigns where we help and we disseminate the knowledge in the community. We work with partner organizations to make sure that we group together and collaborate in advocating for women's rights and work for women who can't raise their own voices. The support that we give to our individual service users, in this case women, is always long-term. It can last for years, and when a woman approaches us or is introduced to us through doctors, social workers, youth protection officers, etc., when we make a contact, we are with the woman from the day we make the contact till she tells us that this is it, I don't need you anymore. It becomes a very, very personal and close bond. And sometimes it lasts for a year, and then we meet the whole family, children, and we work with everyone together. While we're working, we work very closely with lawyers, social workers, and we take women from appointment to appointment. Our role is not a guide. Our role is sometimes as interpreters, sometimes as cultural ambassadors, sometimes advocates, and we make sure never to tell a woman what to do. We tell her what her options are, what the resources are, and always it's her who decides what she wants to do for herself. For our programs, the activities that we have several projects at the center on top of the regular programs that we do. these days, we have 7 programs during these 12 days of action, which are just to help women understand what their rights are, what the resources are, what to do if they come across a woman who needs help, or if they are living in a situation of violence. The projects involve, and I will be talking about them in detail, the projects, there is a project which is basically to break isolation, where we go outreach from home to home on the street to meet women. Then there's another project which we call gender equality, because we believe that the reason for all violence against women is the root cause is gender inequality. And coming from patriarchal societies, many women believe that this is what their fate is, they accept it. And so it's important to increase this knowledge to break these barriers. Then we have several programs in the schools, high schools, and colleges and universities where our workers work with young girls and young women. And we work around violence, whether it's intimate partner violence, or harassment on the streets, or sexual violence. I think, and the last thing to add, that when we give services, we are one of the few centers who are funded by the government, but majority of our funding is not to serve people with precarious status or refugees, but we give services to refugees and precarious status. I was just looking at our last annual general report and was noting the number that we gave services to about 367 people who didn't have a status or were refugee claimants.
Thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the work that you do as well. And so Diana, tell us a little bit about yourself and FCJ.
Thank you. For FCJ Refugee Center, it's a really pleasure to be here among all these organizations that work bringing voice to those women that are here in Canada with precarious status or non-status. As a refugee myself, as a woman, it's really important the work that FCJ Refugee Center does. We are located in Toronto, and FCJ Refugee Center has been around for 30 years. Since the center started, we have been working very close to open the doors to women with precarious status, refugee claimants, and non-status. We have transitional housing, where we host survivors of domestic violence, survivors of labor and sex exploitation. We host refugee claimants, women with children, and we support them in our houses from 6 to up to 1 year. And then when we move them out, we continue supporting them. In general, we have programs, the anti-human trafficking program. We had the migrants mobile program also, and we provide settlement services for the women that are facing precarious status in Canada. In general, FCJ Refugee Center is like well known as like the last resource for many women that are in Canada, whether they are still doing refugee claim process or are rejected refugee claimants, or they are found themselves without having any status. Then we get referrals from lawyers, other community centers, shelters, even sometimes and the police reach out to us when they get a survivor of domestic violence. We work very close with them. We walk shoulder to shoulder with the women even for years. The other day we were doing a report, and we were having a case that we worked with that woman, survivor of domestic violence, for 4 years until finally she got the status in Canada. Then we accompany them and we encourage them through the whole process. FCJ Refugee Center is a place where we open the doors to these women, and we do and accompany them through a pro bono lawyer or through a pro bono law student to do applications like humanitarian and compassion applications to find a remedy to their situation. We know many of them don't have access to resources, and these applications sometimes are really expensive. Some of them, even if they have legal aid, they don't want to be referred to a lawyer because they trust us and they want to keep working with us. Also, we have been seeing that from the pandemic, like there are more cases of non-precarious women facing domestic violence. And because there is a program, a pilot project that 2 years ago the government launched that is called Temporary Resident Permit for Family Violence, the TRP. We noticed that these women can access to legal aid, but legal aid only funds the part of to do the humanitarian and compassionate. That is finally the remedy that will allow them to become a permanent resident and to have a permanent status in Canada. But the part of the temporary resident permit, the part of the application, the work permit, is not funded by legal aid. Then what we have approach is to talk to lawyers and offer them to take the humanitarian and compassionate, and FCJ will do all the forms, all the applications for the temporary resident permit and the open work permits. And we have been working also close with shelters, with survivors of domestic violence, encourage them to do the two things, because doing the TRP and the open work permit will provide stability to the women. In the meantime, they are waiting for the final decision of the humanitarian and compassionate. Then this is really important for us. And as I was mentioning, for example, a refugee claimant that come to our center and they are really afraid to go and separate the refugee claim from the partner or husband, because most of them, the main applicant is the aggressor, is the partner. And then we had to accompany them to talk to the lawyers and to explain to them why they may be successful without being part of the refugee claim with the principal applicant. But we had to accompany them to many appointments, also to provide them with mental health support and making them reassuring that they can have a successful refugee claim and also not being with the principal applicant, because most of them say he's the one who has all the evidence. I'm really afraid. I don't want to that they can say yes to him, and what is going to happen to me, what is going to happen to my children. Then supporting them, working with them, listening to them, and giving voice and saying, here you can find justice too. And again, as my previous speakers have been saying, many of the precarious migrant or undocumented or refugee claimants come from countries that or we don't trust this justice system, or we come and we believe that we need to be with a man in order for us to have a value. And it's a cultural thinking that is for many of the women that we work, it takes time. But at FCJ, we work with them day by day until they decide and they are empowered to do then what they want to do.
Thank you so much, Diana. It's really interesting to hear all of you answer this question, because immediately we're jumping into some of the other things that we'd like to talk about today, like challenges and obstacles. But I'd also really like to point out that knowing all of your work, I can really say that it's amazing to see how many of your programs are able to really provide the support and accompaniment that women need over a long period of time. And we know that that's a huge problem for many people with precarious immigration status, as their needs change over time, to have a place where they can keep going back and to form those trusting relationships with workers that really understand what it is that they're going through and what their reality is. So with that in mind, I'd like to jump to the next question, which is, what are the challenges and obstacles for you in carrying out this work? And also, what are your main priorities? And so we'll begin with María.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you everyone for having me here. I think that, as you were saying, many of the things have been already put out there on the table. But going back to that question, I think that from the work that we do at FCJ and also from the frontline work that we do, it is always important to keep in mind that all this support and accompany women and clients has to always be done from an intersectional and anti-oppressive approach. Because I think that one, from our experience here at the center, one of the biggest challenges, it was already mentioned by some of you, is the precarious immigration status that a women can have. And so navigating the different systems that are already in society, with knowing that there is a precarious immigration status, it can be very challenging. It can also imply that women will take longer to actually come out there and seek for that help. I think that what Rosa and Diana were pointing out points like, for example, the women, we come from different experiences in the different countries that we come from. Like, there is a fear of not trusting the systems or the authority back where we come from. So just giving that first step of having to go to talk with a lawyer, or having to go to family court, or those places, it can be very challenging for them. So I think that's one of the first biggest challenges. Also, like how to working with them to have access to the different services that are available out there for them. Like, for example, access to housing for victims of domestic violence. Like, we know that there is even like services out there already available for women and for migrant women, where they can access shelter, housing. But even accessing those services can be, so if they don't have the support of an agency or a support worker, like many of us do that job, it can be re-traumatizing for some of them. Or even just picking up that phone and doing the first call to look for a shelter for women victims of domestic violence, it can be overwhelming, because we know that doing those things, sometimes there is not enough space, shelters that are at full capacity. And so I think that our role is, as Diana was saying, is working with them and trying to be that support, so that once they are ready to move on and give those next steps, they have someone that they can rely on. And I think that also that's where it comes the other question in place, that what are our main priorities? I think that one of the main priorities here at the center, and that they have shared not only with all the residents and clients that we work with, is like providing access to justice to these women. And And this is not only done by helping them to navigate those complex systems that are already in place in society, but also even providing workshops or having conversations with the women in our houses about knowing their rights, like their labor rights, because we also have seen, for example, many residents or clients that we work with, that they end up in very precarious labor employment situations, and that is also important for them to know that what are their rights, and as not only as their labor right, but also when there is a situation of domestic violence or abuse in employment settings. So I think that those are some of the few priorities that we focus also on access to justice. And also, I think it's also one of the things that it is important to mention is that during, as Diana was saying, and during COVID-19, we saw that increase of domestic violence cases, or being women the ones who were supporting these their families by themselves. And so also like how it gave us, like it put us in a place where we have to identify how could we better support and assist women and single moms, young women who were in a very precarious situations in terms of housing, employment, and access to services when you are undocumented or with a precarious status in Canada.
Thank you. Yeah, you can really see how all of these different factors are intersecting, and certainly how the pandemic is amplifying these existing inequalities. So Juvaria, would you like to add to this discussion?
Yes, thank you. So I'll talk about the challenges that we at the center face, and then what are our priorities. So one of the main challenges is to work with our service users, the women that we are serving, to make them understand their rights. And part of that is to make them understand that it's their right to have a safe life free of violence, and the man does not have the right to be violent towards her. It is not okay to let the aggressor be violent towards a woman. And it's never okay that the children witness that violence. A lot of our time is taken just to convince the woman that for children to witness the violence going on is not a good choice. Because many women tell us we're staying in the violent situation or accepting it because we are doing it for the future of our children, to give them a good life. And so our struggle starts there, to make them understand why violence is not acceptable, or why it's not a good lesson to teach to the children. Another lesson that challenge that we face is when we are acting as the cultural ambassadors. We are not doing it ourselves, but we are put in the spot, and the experts who are dealing with the case, example, lawyer or social worker, doctors, nurses, they ask us, okay, so in your culture, this is the norm. This is not right. This is how it's done. I'll give you a simple example. I was dealing with the case where a young woman's children were taken away, a newborn baby was taken away, and she was also going through a violent situation. DPG or youth protection was involved, and so I had to defend the woman because she didn't have a crib for the newborn baby. And I had to explain that in many South Asian countries, it's the norm that a newborn baby sleeps with the mother. The mother doesn't smother the baby. It's a norm. So if a mother doesn't have a crib, she's not a criminal. She should not be penalized that her newborn baby is taken away. Another challenge is that many of our women do not speak English or French. And they might understand a little bit of English because coming from South Asian countries, we were colonized by the Great Britain, which means English is the second language in most South Asian countries, but French is brand new. It takes a longer time for women to learn French, and a woman with precarious status or refugee claimant, it's a choice between learning the language or having a job and feed her family. So of course, nobody goes to learn the language and then she's stuck. There's a new bill, Bill 96, coming in. And we're very afraid that if it becomes the law, then we will also be stopped from serving the women in the languages that we serve in. Our center, we have 11 workers who speak about 11, 12 South Asian languages on top of French and English. And right now, majority of work is carried out in South Asian languages. So it's a big challenge if our service users come to us and we are made to speak with them in French, then they will not have any support left. Another one of the challenge for us is that violence is a taboo subject in many South Asian countries. It's considered a very personal matter, and people say that it should be kept within the family and not talked about outside, which gives more power, which changes the power dynamics in the family, more power to the aggressor to be more controlling and violent. And women don't prefer to come out and talk about violence happening in their homes. To break this taboo is a big challenge. So that's why we do so many programs to talk about violence. One success which we have seen is that initially when we started discussions on violence or workshops on violence, we noticed that the group or audience that's sitting there is not participating at all. The facilitator and maybe a few center workers are talking about violence, but nobody's participating. Again, and when we encourage them to talk, they say, okay, but violence never happens in my family. I've never seen it happening. So I have nothing to contribute to this discussion. So we ended up creating another project where we developed a few non-verbal theaters, because when we have a workshop, we have a group of women who speak several languages. So it's important that the theater that we created was non-verbal. It's a small 5-minute theater presentation, which we show, which touches a single or 2 topics around violence. And then we ask our audience, what's happening here? What do you see? What do you think? Who is the aggressor? Who is the victim? What's the impact on children? And we saw such an amazing interest and participation that we continued this project, and that helped to kind of break that taboo of not talking about violence happening in the society or the culture. Another challenge is not being able to reach out to everyone, which I know is our dream. We want to talk to all women. A recent murder of Rajinder Kaur, who was from our community, South Asian community, murdered by her husband in front of her children, has really affected all of us, the service users who come to us, our workers, and we wish we could have somehow stopped it. The pandemic, as the others are saying, has put a lot of pressure we see on other organizations. As a result, we are getting a lot of cases from them, from youth workers, from social workers. They are unable to find interpreters. They are unable to give the support that they are normally able to give. And so we have also noticed that these past 2 years, the number of cases, especially of women who are going through violent situations, have doubled at the center level also. The priority for us is outreaching and advocacy. So by outreaching, meaning meeting as many women as we can, so that we can reach out to women who need us, who are suffering violent situation at home, or we can meet women who can potentially help other women, and advocacy with all the women groups that we are partners of, that we are members of, and to work with them together to make things right. We know that there are not enough shelters, especially shelters for women who are from diverse origins. We know that people don't understand them. And so we try hard to work to make it a little easy for women going through violence.
Thank you so much, Juvaria. And Rosa, what are your challenges and obstacles in carrying out this work, and what are some of your priorities? And I'd just like to add, I'm cognizant of the time, so about 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Well, I think that the other panelists have done amazing work sharing in very kind of detail and very clearly the challenges. So I just echo everything they said is what we are facing, and you know, just to highlight that the issue of gender-based violence is endemic and epidemic, and then with COVID, you know, it's another pandemic, you know. So we need to acknowledge that, because that has created more isolation for women and children who are experiencing some form of gender-based violence, and also has created a lot of work for us. And I know last year we knew that because of the COVID pandemic, women were going to be trapped in their homes, because usually one of the ways in which they try to find some level of safety or some access to support is by going to community centers or the church, or, you know, but then all of a sudden they couldn't go out. So we decided go 24/7. So the number of our calls like increased like triple, right? And then now is, as you said, the work is double. Like we have a huge wait list for counseling, and our workers are, of course, exhausted because there is a need for the support, right? And as was said here, the support is not just to provide an appointment. And you know, sometimes when I hear that some people say, yeah, we work from a trauma-informed services, and I said, okay, and what do you do? How do you do it, right? Because what does that mean? Like, what do you really understand the deep issue, right? And part of our work, if we go from the individual, is that we need to understand that the person is not the problem. The problem is the issue of gender-based violence. So many service providers tend to individualize the problem, right? To say, this is a woman's problem, you need to leave, you need to do this, how come you don't know this? And something that was said here, like many of the women we support, they come from backgrounds that from the moment they are born, they are oppressed, and they are being told women are there to submit, men are to dominate, you are responsible to keep the family together, your children need a father, right? So part of our work is to deconstruct those ideas, because those ideas, we learn it from childhood, and then they get reinforced through society, through our own family, through our own community, through the priest at the church, right? I had a woman who, she had called the police and their partner got arrested. And one day she came to see me and she said, oh, I got a phone call from my pastor and he wants me to drop the charges. So I had to explain to her that it's based in the criminal law, the criminal system. She's not the one who is putting the charges, right? So I explained to her how the system works. And then I said, if you give me your consent, I can call the pastor and explain to him how the criminal system works, because by him putting pressure on you, he's interfering with your right to access safety, right? So then she gave me the consent and I ended calling the pastor, right? I was very happy to make that phone call, right? Because again, that's one example about how, and actually she got beat up at the church. The pastor was even a witness, right? And he was saying, this is a shame for our community. You need to talk to the crown and tell them that you don't want to press charges. Like, imagine, right? After everything it took for her, years of 20 years of being in a relationship, right? And finally she did it because of her own safety. And then she gets this pressure. So the challenges are that we need to deconstruct those ideas that are imposed on us. And then once that she starts thinking, okay, you are right, I deserve safety, my children deserve a father who is loving and caring instead of this person who is abusive and violent, right? And then she starts taking the steps, and then you have someone from the church, or you have the community, or the mother, or the extended family, the mother-in-law who is putting her back there. So it's all these barriers that we have to cross, and then we have the system, and I think we are going to talk more about the system, and I can add about how once that you reach out the system may or may not support you. The system may oppress you more and send you back into that, and that goes together with housing, right? Like for us to find some safe temporarily housing for women with precarious immigration status in Vancouver and BC is so hard, right? Like there are transition houses and shelters that we have to beg them, right? And they said, yeah, but you have, like, what, after a month you have to make sure that she's not here anymore, right? And I'm like, where is our heart? Where's our compassion, right? I understand that we have different policies and guidelines to follow, but we're working with human beings, right? And change doesn't happen in 1 minute. So when we talk about the systems, I want to talk about how also women are criminalized because of their status. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks so much for that. We're really starting to touch on, I think, what we would all like to see in terms of systemic change in Canada, and particularly for precarious status migrant women. So our next question is about strategies to support systemic level change, and that would better uphold the rights and well-being of refugee and immigrant women, girls, and gender diverse people. And as some of you may know, Cassie has a new initiative that I'm working on, which is about trying to explore what a national network or what some type of national alliance could look like for refugee, immigrant, and racialized women in Canada. And so really thinking about how we can work together on a local scale, but also on a national scale in order to really advance some systemic change. So I'm wondering if Juvaria, you'd like to start off the conversation here.
Yes, I'm thinking a woman who has gone through the whole process of leaving her home, her support system, her family to come and settle into a new country is already at a disadvantage. Then being in a violent situation puts her in a very, very, very vulnerable spot. On top of all of that, if the woman does not have the immigration status here or is a refugee claimant, she has basically access to very limited resources which are there. Even the financial assistance that she gets is really peanuts for survival of any human being. The system does not provide any much help for her. Every year we receive many women who are refugee claimants or who do not have a status, immigration status here. And from my experience of working with these women, seeing these women, I see that they end up suffering even more by the hands of their abusers, just because, as others have just said, that they have this fear of deportation. Their case is connected with the principal applicant who is the aggressor. And so if a woman like this wants to come out, there is no shelter. You're so right. You're talking about BC, Rosa, but the thing is, here in Montreal, Quebec, we are going through exactly the same situation. I remember I was working here at the center. It was almost 9 p.m. at night, and suddenly a woman comes with a suitcase. And I ask her, I don't speak her language because the worker who speaks her language is gone. And she explains to me that the police sent her and she has no idea. So after a long talk, I understood that we need to find a shelter for her to spend the night. She had no status, doesn't speak the language. And I ended up at 9:30 at night, I'm trying to call and trying to find a shelter for her, begging people to just, and in the end, the negotiation that I ended up doing is that 8 a.m. in the morning, I have to bring her back. The shelter was ready to take her, and I have to find another one at 8 a.m. And so this happens. That's a reality. We need more shelters. We need support. We need special support for people with precarious status. I know that other immigrants have the support a little bit better, the support system available. And for that, I think working as a bigger group, our voice will be heard better. Right now, we are trying to work with local organizations here. For example, we are partner of LAIR, which is all women centers of Quebec. It's a big umbrella organization. We are partner of TCRI, which is a table for refugee claimant people. We work with MCVI, which is a movement against violence and incest, etc. So working, I think, at a national level will make us a bigger, stronger group. Collaboration, sharing of resources, sharing of our skills, I think will help in the end.
Thank you so much, Juvaria. And Rosa, if you want to continue on here.
Yes, I believe, and I believe in networks because it's how I achieve many things for the people who access our support. And what I wanted to say about the system, and so in 2009, I had a case where someone was arrested, a woman was arrested, and then the domestic violence unit from Vancouver Police called me because someone I know from there called me and told me, oh, I have a woman who speaks Spanish and she got arrested and she's going to be released today, but I cannot find any shelter or transition house because she's seen as the perpetrator, right? And then her children got apprehended. So then I said, oh, bring her to my office and then I can talk to her. So through talking to her, I learned that she had married a white Canadian man. She had 2 children. He brought her to Vancouver and he said, I'm going to do the sponsorship for you. So time started passing by and then what we learned is that he never had applied. There was not an application. She didn't have a status. Now her children are apprehended. And when I started asking her what had happened, so what had happened is that there was a history of physical violence, right? And very dangerous. The guy was very violent and she didn't speak the language. She was concerned because he will say, if you call the police, you are going to be deported. The children are going to be taken away, which is some of the abusive tactics that, or that we know many people, men who are abusive, use in their relationships. So she was afraid to speak up. So, but she had a case, right, against him because of the level of violence was physical, was assault, right? So at some point she learned that you can call 911 and they can help you. So she decided she told him, I'm leaving. And he's like, no, you are not leaving. So she called 911 and he grabbed the phone from her. She took her children and went outside to wait for the police because in her mind is, I heard that if you call 911 and you wait, police come and help you, right? So when he took the phone, the operator, the 911 operator asked him, do you want a police ambulance? And then he said, oh, my wife is trying to hurt me with a knife, right? But she was outside waiting. So to make the story short, the police came. She didn't speak English. He gave his side of the story. She got arrested and she was put in jail 4 days, and she's like a tiny, very young woman. He is taller, bigger, and 20 years older than her. Then she was put in jail for 4 days and then released. And so then I had to do a lot of work. It was like, she's a case study. I had to do a lot of work to for the criminal system to drop the charges. And through the process, he ended confessing that he had lied and that actually she assaulted him. It took like 3 months for her to get her children back. And, you know, so that after that story, I decided to start researching what happens with women who are maybe accused because of they are self-defending, or maybe it's a wrongful arrest, right? False allegations. And we created like a campaign, we created a toolkit, we were out there talking about this is an issue. And if many women anti-violence organizations were not supporting these women because they are the perpetrator. Well, just to end with this, after gathering a number of cases, that was over 100 cases, 80% of the women who had been arrested under these circumstances were immigrant women, racialized women, women who didn't speak English at the time. And I convinced some women to even write a police complaint, and we submitted 5 police complaints, and we were successful with 4. But you know that this comes to show that many service providers encourage people, and in this case, immigrant refugee women with precarious immigration status, to engage with the criminal system, right? And then again, they don't want to do it because the majority of women, they want the relationship to improve. They want their partner to understand and change. They don't want the relationship to end, you know, and they have hopes that the violence is going to stop at some point. And they don't want to harm. What women tell me, oh no, if I call the police, I don't want him to lose his job or to have a criminal record. Like, even when women are suffering, they care so much about that person, right? So again, it takes a lot to engage with the criminal system, and sometimes the criminal system is not really providing or following even their own practices, right? Their own policies. And we need to recognize that still we have a way to go within the different institutions and systems, because they are still racist, classist, sexist, you know, and sometimes that interferes with people getting access to justice. So in the solution, what I see as the solution is that we continue naming what we see, researching, you know, like looking at the trends, connecting with networks as we are doing today. And we do it in Vancouver and British Columbia. We have been working with networks for so long. And trying to find the right resources, right, for women to get the support. Like in this case, after we exposed that there was a number of women with precarious immigration status who had issues when they were trying to access the criminal system, then many organizations started to also provide services, becoming aware of the issue. You know, the women were not discriminated against anymore. Then they could access the support, and a worker could ask her, what is your story? What is your side of the story, right? And maybe, you know, she had been beat up for 10 years, and that day she just decided to throw the car keys at his feet, and then he called the police, right? So I'm not saying that that is okay, but there is always a story, right? And we need to explore, and police are supposed to make an assessment based on who has the power in the relationship and what is the history of violence within the relationship.
Thanks so much for sharing that story and for sharing about your experiences advocating for women who have been criminalized by the system or various systems. I think it's really important to consider how, you know, within the criminal justice system, racialized women and immigrant women are criminalized, but also within the immigration system as well too, right? It's an intersection. So I think that story really illustrates that. So thank you so much. And so last but not least, I'm wondering if both Diana and Maria, you want to add in what FCJ considers as strategies towards moving forward the elimination of violence against women.
Maria, you were going to be first?
So I think that, and I don't want to, I think that all the speakers have made valid points, and I think we have had similar experience in the work that we do. When I was looking at this question, what I was thinking is that it is important that the system and the different levels of system recognize that, at least for my experience, I recognize that I work with racialized women. And so we have to recognize the different identities, the different dimensions of their identity, because as many of you were already saying, it keeps showing that women are put in positions where they have to keep proving or continue proving the different systems that what happened to them is true. And instead of having to put women in that position of re-traumatizing or telling the story one more time and over again, I think it should be the system and the different levels of system should be designed from this perspective that we believe her story. And so the approach and the way that we work with them will end up being different. And I think also recognizing that networking is very important, but also like there should be out there more resources available. Even like I was, while Rosa was sharing her experience, I was thinking like we sometimes we talk about having resources like interpretation or victims can access not only call the police, but they should have the right to have an interpreter or somebody that helps them when there is a language barrier. And but sometimes we don't use that resources, or the resources that are out there are very limited. So I think it's a matter of continue advocating that part of doing access to justice is also providing women the resources that they need so that they can actually tell their story and explain what had been happening to them. Also, I one of the things that I believe is that different systems have to always have the gender analysis and the gender perspective. Like at least in FCJ, like we have different we support clients and women with different immigration proceedings, and not many times the gender perspective or the gender analysis in those proceedings is put at the center. Like we were talking with my colleague Diana, we have many single moms or victims of domestic abuse applying for humanitarian and compassionate applications. And if you look at the requirements of that application, it's basically proving establishment. And how you're going to prove establishment when you also have to look after your children, or after like looking at like taking care of your house, looking for that your children go to school. So I think that the gender perspective has to always be put in place in those different systems that women, and in particularly like precarious migrant women, have to navigate in Canada.
I just want to add that for all of us, it's real clear that the intersection of gender, race, and that we work with visible minority status. But is the government getting this lens? We have been talking about this, and the government is calling a feminist government, but they don't provide the resources to the organizations that work and are dealing with the situations of gender-based violence. We had to work with counting our pennies every day. You try to reach out to other organizations, and it is waiting list, as Rosa was saying, because also the pandemic had been like exacerbating what was happening underground. but because and there is waiting lists everywhere, waiting lists to access to mental health support, waiting lists for housing, waiting lists to get a pro bono lawyer, waiting lists everywhere. Then we should get organized. All the organizations, we should not be put in the place that we had to compete for resources, that there is a grant there and then only 2-3 organizations get it and the rest what happened. And I think the government need to recognize that, as other the colleagues were saying here, gender-based violence is a pandemic issue, and that it is happening, and that we need support, and the government should provide the resources for us to continue keeping the doors open and supporting precarious, non-status undocumented women in Canada.
Thanks so much for that. I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have been commenting and asking in the question and answer box. So I'm going to go to the first question now, and I will just read it out to all of the panelists, and then feel free, any one of you, to jump in and offer an answer. So the first question is, any suggestions of how to reform the refugee system so that partners who are subject to violence are able to fast-track independently the refugee claims? Making women so dependent on the male or principal applicant is so clearly the perpetuation of patriarchy, which still continues to dominate our society. So yeah, thoughts on this question?
But there is a guideline on gender-based violence for refugee women that are fleeing domestic violence back home, and we are still seeing that even having these guidelines, some board members are still applying high bars for example, state protection. They will say a woman, sorry, I believe you, what happened to you, but I also believe you have a state protection. There is beautiful written laws back in your country. Why you didn't accept them? Then go back, you can be there. And then if a woman has a case and is giving those high bars, imagine a woman that they are with a partner here, that he's the principal applicant, he has everything, calling to the board members to understand that the journey of migration asseverates also the domestic violence here, and recognizing that those women need protection. And I like the idea of the person that asked the question to fast track those cases, that they don't have to wait, because sometimes they had to wait for the aggressor to be called for a hearing, and then they are called for a hearing, they cannot be in the same room, but even though you asking to separate the cases, it will be good to have a conversation with the Immigration and Refugee Board and asking to fast track these cases, that they don't have to wait so long to get the refugee protection.
I think that, yeah, we need to continue pushing for a kind of the guidelines or procedures to recognize that, again, women who come to Canada by themselves or with their children, just by the fact that they are taking that risk, because even if we have been talking about how we are taught to submit and how oppressed we are. So in my experience, when I meet a woman who is coming to Canada by herself, and sometimes she had to cross the United States by land, putting herself at risk to make it here. So I think that just by that, you know, they need to start considering that she must be escaping from something, right? Because it's very hard to make it here. And in regards applying with a partner, I think that they will need to just again, by the fact that she is separating from that partner because there is gender violence or some form of violence in the relationship, then they will need to take that as a one factor to support the person. In our case, on our side, we try to do everything we can to support the person with her application. And I know, for example, for Mexican women, many applications have been denied under this idea that there is democracy and that there are laws to protect her, so she's going to be safe to go back. So in one of the cases, what we did is to connect with many organizations in Mexico, like transition houses, shelters, groups, feminist groups, NGOs, and ask them for letters to kind of share what was the experience, right? That if she were to go back, how they think that democracy and those institutions and the law was going to protect her. And everybody wrote down that she didn't have a chance, right? And in that case, that was helpful. And I know you are familiar with the death of Lucia Jimenez, who committed suicide while on detention. And after that happened, we were like asking for the inquest, and we were able to achieve with a number of organizations, we were able to achieve to access the inquest, right? And media was portraying her as, oh, this woman, immigrant, didn't have a status and maybe mental health issues, and then she committed suicide while on detention. And what I told them there is that she was forced to choose to die here or to die in Mexico, because there was proof, and the proof came through the inquest, that she had escaped from gender violence, and there was evidence about that it came up, you know. But during the time that she tried to access a status, then her applications were denied, whether because she didn't share the full story because of the impact of trauma, or the lawyer didn't kind of engage in submitting all the different applications that she could submit. So what we did was to talk to the Canadian Border Agency. And at that time, we told them that as a result of this, we wanted them to provide information to women who are at risk of deportation, to provide them information about battered women support services, because we wanted to support them, whether to review the possible legal case that they may have, but if they don't have any case and they are going to be deported, at least for us to find a plan that we could make once that they go back into their country. And then they agreed to do that. And I have an example of a woman that unfortunately we couldn't succeed at her application, and then she had to go back to El Salvador. And so then what we did is to connect with women's organizations there, and a group went to the airport to receive her there and to make sure that she was going to have some access to safety, which for Lucia, that was not offered, right? Like, she knew that if she was going to go back to her country, then she was going to face death by a gang, and then she was left without choice. But she didn't have mental health issues. She was looking for life. She was looking for hope. She wanted to live in this country and feel safe, right? So I think that that is very sad that happened, but how we took action was by connecting with the Canadian Border Agency and to suggest other ways of communicating, at least with what we have, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for highlighting that case. I think it's something that we still continue to learn from today, and it also is related to this other question that's come into the chat, which is about kind of macro level work. So I'll read out this question. I think we have time for just one more, but it says, to my understanding, most of the work that you described is focused on domestic or micro level violence against women. Are any of you aware of any services, initiatives, or actions against systemic violence or macro level violence in Canada that marginalized women face because of their race, gender, immigration status, language, etc. So I'll just open it up to all of you to talk about the various initiatives that you're involved with. Or perhaps you could say, perhaps you could talk a little bit about how this helps to advance your work, because I know that, for example, even on an international scale, that some of you are involved in solidarity movements as well. So if you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
So I can talk about the work with women within Latin America, right? And in our case, we were connected with the indigenous women in southern Mexico. And we have like a network of, at international level, right? We have a network that we use to support each other and sometimes to support the people who access our services, right? And I want to share right now, we are doing some research, and the project is the color of violence, the color of gender violence. And we want to address the issues that racialized Black, indigenous women are facing, you know, and I think that we are going to share the link, but that is an opportunity for us to really ask the people who are accessing our support and even our own selves as workers to answer that survey and to participate in that project, because that can give us the opportunity to kind of expand and find other ways of doing this work.
I just want to add that FCJ, during the 30 years of assistance and working with refugees, we have been also being part of and doing research and going back to, for example, our former co-director, Francisco Rico Martinez, and Loli, who is our co-director. They have been going back to Mexico, El Salvador, for example, visiting the refugee, the transitional houses that many refugees and most of them women living domestic violence or any gender-based violence from El Salvador, Guatemala, that they transitioned walking through all these like houses that host them. For years, they have been going back and seeing how is the journey, what are the needs, because finally, we know that finally the destination for many of them is Canada, especially since the last government in the United States is not recognizing that women fleeing gender-based violence should be protected, and these asylum seekers should get protection in the United States. Then most of them, they know that they cannot stay in the United States, that they had to pass through the United States, but they want to reach Canada because Canada is a country that may give them the opportunity to have a refugee claim. If they are going to approve, many of them, they are not. Some of them are recognized and providing the support. But then also we see that in those countries, the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of mining companies that go and do violence against indigenous community, and many of them women that are protecting the land and the resources are displaced. And if mining companies from Canada are going there doing displacements, where are they going? Then FCJ have been going also and participating in research, looking the root causes of these migrants coming and looking for the north.
Thanks so much. So I'm cognizant of the time, so we have just 5 minutes left. So I want to offer all of you the opportunity to say very briefly, 30 seconds to a minute, just some closing remarks. So I'm wondering, Juvaria, would you like to start? Maybe a reflection or two on what we've talked about today.
I think I've learned a lot today, and I'm so honored to be here today amongst all of you to learn about our services. I would like to move forward from here, taking our experiences together and do something together to collaborate on issues that are very close to our objectives of being here. Just thankful.
Perfect. And Rosa?
Yeah, I'm also thankful that we are invited to have this conversation, you know, just to have a voice. When I came to Canada 25 years ago, I didn't speak English. So first I didn't even know how to speak the language. And then I think that these issues were not put on the table, and we as immigrant workers hardly got invited to a panel, right? So I want to acknowledge that, and we have come a long way. So having this network of people and having a voice where we can make visible the invisible, right? And I want to appreciate the thousands of women who have access, at least by women support services, and who have trusted that we can provide support, because it takes a lot of courage to break the silence, and it takes a lot of courage to access a service, right? And to expose what's going on, and to trust that you are going to receive the help and to affect change. And what I tell women who access Battered Women Support Services is, by you doing your work, you are affecting change in the lives of other women, right? Who you are going to help in the future. And we have many immigrant women, non-status women, that at some point they start kind of getting a job or going back to school, and then they come back and they say, now I want to give back. Can I volunteer with your organization? Can I take your training? So I just want to acknowledge that yeah, they have provided all this knowledge that we bring, and that when we think about the global north, you know, and how people have to come here, that sometimes the global north also is creating the impacts on, through globalization, is creating the impacts on other lands, and then that's why people end coming to the global north, right? And that's a fact. So we need to acknowledge that. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. María and Diana?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's an honor for me to be sharing the space with colleagues, but also people that have had the experience for so many years. I think that it is important to have this type of spaces, not only to raise awareness of the issues that we spoke today, but also to bring the perspective of people that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis, because I think that that's very valid, and we have like it's something that happens that we see every day in our work, and it's important that in this type of conversation is always brought up. So thank you.
I just want to answer, thank you, all of you, and those that were listening. And thank you to all the women with precarious status that trust us, that come to us, that bring their stories, and to allow us to keep working with them and supporting them. Because it's not just us here waiting for you, is your validation of your story, is coming out and saying, I'm not a number, I'm a person, and I have a story, I have a family, I have a background, I am. And thank you to those women that have the strength to speak and give us the trust to work with them.
Thanks so much to all of you. It's been such a pleasure to moderate this panel and to be able to spend this hour and a half with you. So Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I wholeheartedly thank all our panelists, Rosa-Elena, Diana, María, and Juvaria for participating, and Leah for a great moderating of an excellent discussion today. Myself and N4 as a whole want to thank each of you for participating in today's panel. And many thanks to you, the audience, for joining and engaging with us today. You're welcome to join us again for our upcoming events, and as well, from what Rosa-Elena had alluded to, BWSS is hosting a couple upcoming events too. María has added them to the chat, so please check them out as well. If you missed any part of today's discussion or would like to watch this event again, we'll be posting the recording to the N4 platform within the next week or so. And we want to continue the dialogue that this webinar has started. We will be moving all the questions we did not get a chance to address to our online moderated discussion forum called the Meeting Place. We've invited our panelists to respond to your questions there. We've also curated several resources related to today's webinar topic from a variety of our partners, and you can find these in our resource toolkit, and we will be linking to them when we share the on-demand version. So if you haven't yet, please sign up to newcomernavigation.ca for all our resources and learning opportunities. Following today's session, you'll be invited to complete a survey to share your feedback with N4. These surveys help us continuously improve and seek out new webinar content and opportunities that are responsive to topics that you're interested in. We kindly ask that you follow the link and complete this brief survey. So once again, thank you for joining us, everyone, and thank you for participating in our panel discussion today. All those on the line. We hope you can join us again at a future N4 event, and we hope you stay safe, stay well, and take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.